Hey, so we're in a little mini series in the midst of our larger series called Life in the Public Square, what we would call our view of the world. What is a biblical worldview? But it's actually a little bit more than that. And today we start with this word of origin. Throughout the Word of God, God always describes himself or is described as a relational being, unlike other gods of other cultures and so forth throughout history and time have not been interested so much in relationship as they are in appeasement, keeping me happy, keeping God happy, keeping the crops growing and death out from the door and so forth. But God from the beginning looks for this man, Abram. He spins it into a 12 sons of Jacob, and then he spins that into a nation all the way down to where we are today. And all through it, you see God interacting with people in a relational manner.
You could almost say in the pantheistic gods, the family of gods that are out there were extremely dysfunctional. That if there was a relationship with man, it was not a healthy one, and you didn't want to cross the path of a god. Whatever pantheon you're looking at, they pretty much all have that same identity. Where men tried to be more like, okay, we try to just do our crops, we try to live our life, and just keep them happy and away from us as much as possible. But the gift that we have from the Word of God, from you could say from the Jews, is this story, this alternative worldview that is different than every other worldview that was out there that was said, no, actually it's not like that at all. There is one God, only one, and his relationship with us is one of a father to his children.
There's another interesting read, if you're interested, called The Gift of the Jews. Mm-hmm. And for the life of me, I cannot recall the author. I just got done reading it. But again, just this fascinating take on what is it with the Jewish people? What is it with it? What was God after? And in the New Testament, we read that God's the God of Jew and Greek, Gentile, and not male or female. And we talked about that just a couple weeks ago. But it's interesting that this particular message falls on Father's Day, because if you think about it, one thing is sure. Well, actually two. One is that everybody in the room has a father. No one, it wasn't the Cabbage Patch, it wasn't the stork, it wasn't, whatever it was. It wasn't Darth Vader.
There's kids in the room.
Sorry to spoil it for you, but everybody here has a father somewhere. And the second thing that is equally true is that father, present or not, functional or dysfunctional, good or bad, godly or not, has had an impact on our lives. It's shaped our lives, even in ways that may be unconscious to us. I have a father, and whatever that father did or did not do has shaped who I am today. I mean, that's an amazing thing when you think about it. Now, I may not like to think about it. I may have pushed it to the back of my mind. I may be in denial about it and say, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. Even if your father was non-existent, that has shaped who we are. And so the Bible is really direct in the whole New Testament about the revelation. When Jesus was getting ready to go after spending 3.5 relational years with his best friends, he said, I'm going. And Nathanael said, show us the Father. And Jesus said, Philip, have I been with you so long that you haven't seen the Father? Philip, he that has seen me has seen the Father. The message and the mission of Jesus was to reveal the Father.
So who am I? What is my identity? And where does my security lie? These are really rooted in origin. That relationship that God has with man answers those questions. If we decide to take that relationship away, which is what our culture has done, they've said for a long time now, philosophy's decided that God is dead, that the idea of God can no longer exist in the public square as a rational way of living your life. You call that existentialism, that kind of entered into mainstream, slowly into mainstream through Nietzsche and others. That idea said, all there is what you can see. All that you see is all that there is. There is no transcendent reality. There's nothing beyond the physical. But the Word of God, the very beginning, again, speaks an alternative worldview that says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So here's these two warring ideas that have been on the stage, at least in the Western world, for several generations now. One says, time, chance, and matter is all there is. And the only reason there is anything is because there's been plenty of time for chance and matter to interact with one another. And the other one says, no, actually, before there was anything, there was God. And from God came everything. Not just he created the heavens and the earth, but if we continue to read in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, we see that he made man in his own image. In the image of God, he created us. From the dust of the ground, yes, he used material to do that, but he gave that dust life, something more than any other life he'd given. He'd created other life, but there was something special about man that he put in man that he didn't put in anything else, and it was his breath and his image.
In fact, it says in Genesis, he breathed into man and man became a living soul. A living soul. It's interesting, how we use the word soul. They say the ship went down and 600 souls were lost. We talk about soul music, right? Kia has a soul, right? We describe a planet of, someone said, John Ortberg says, we live on a planet of lost souls. Your soul is this personality part of you, and we're not here to unpack all of that or a materialistic worldview, but if we are just time and chance and matter and just a bunch of stuff in motion, then really it's all irrelevant, isn't it? We are at the mercy of chance. We are at the mercy of random happenings in the universe, and most importantly, life has not much meaning. Anything that has meaning is just what I can wrap my hands around, and even then, I'm not sure. A famous line from a play goes, if there is no God, then why do we miss him so much? If there is no God, why do we miss him so much? Well, we miss him so much because Proverbs says, Ecclesiastes says, God has placed eternity in the hearts of men. So the stamp, if you will, of the image of God on us is this yearning for something, he used the word transcendent, something that goes beyond it. And we feel it every once in a while. We get it every once in a while, don't we? We sit at a beautiful sunset with a friend, and there's a connection between beauty and creation and this friendship. Conversation over a dinner that's different than any other conversation. And you feel this connection, this transcendent thing that this is more than just chemicals right now. This is something between us. There's something on a soul level. And so God from the beginning has related to his people. But if you notice the book all through the Old Testament, the prophets were always calling people back to a relationship with God, as if they'd kind of wandered. In fact, the prophets would use the words like adultery and other things to describe their wandering. The prophets would use words that describe marital infidelity to describe the wandering of people from God. Listen to Isaiah chapter 1. Hear this, O heavens, hear me, listen, earth. For the Lord has spoken. I reared children and brought them up, but they've rebelled against me. They used to know me, but now they're stiff-necked and they're in rebellion. They've wandered. And this is God. The ox knows its master, and the donkey knows where his food comes from, the owner's manger. But Israel does not know me. They do not understand. Woe to the sinful nation, a people whose guilt is great, the brood of evildoers, children given to corruption. They have forsaken the Lord. They've spurned the Holy One of Israel and turned their backs on him. Later in that very same chapter, you hear God circle back through the words of the prophet and say, come, let us reason together. He says to these wandering people, come. He doesn't say, I'm going to get you. I know where to find you. I'm going to smoke you. And he says, no, come. Let us reason together. You hear the heart of God there? God of the universe is reaching out to people, creation, and saying, come, let us reason together. I want to have a conversation with you about this. Though your sins are as scarlet, I will make them as white as snow. So this God doesn't come after us angry. He comes after us with redemption to offer.
So it sounds like we feel like oh, we're brand new in this. This is a brand new idea to say God is dead, to say that we don't need God. But the prophets would actually show that that's a lie, that has been the default of man's heart since the beginning. That the outlier is actually when a man is a friend of God. The Abraham, the Isaac, the Jacob, the David, these are surprise stories of someone who actually moves towards God instead of away from him. Instead of rejecting him and rebelling and choosing to live on his own, they move towards it. But the default in our heart is to reject the authority of God. But listen, when we reject the authority of God, something has to take its place. You ever heard this phrase, nature abhors a vacuum? Nature abhors a vacuum. It means that there's no such thing as empty space. Something will rush in to fill it. That just is what happens. And on the throne of our heart, if God is not there, something will be there. And I think we inherently know I'm not enough. Somehow I'd like to be just in charge of everything. I have delusions of grandeur that way, that I would like to just, if I was in charge around here. But we also, especially I think in men's heart, there's this fear of failure, that I know I'm not enough. I want to be enough, but I know I'm not enough. I'll never forget reading this article a few years back. It doesn't matter who it was, but it was a famous manly man in this Men's Health magazine. And I was sitting waiting for my dad, whose body was falling apart at this time through cancer, and he was dying. And I'm looking at Men's Health as he's in talking to the doctor, and I just thought, I'll read this article. And right at the outset, the first thing he says was, he said, I feel like since I was 12 years old, I've been waiting for someone to walk into the room and tell me I was a man. And he was in the middle of his life now. He says, I still am waiting for someone to do that, to just tell me I'm enough. And so if we're not enough, we turn to look for something else that is enough, and institutions tend to fill that place. And you'll see that right now in our own culture, whether it be political institutions or economic institutions or any institution we can find. Well, this governmental system will save us. Capitalism is in decline. Young people are turning towards socialism. All we need is socialism. Socialism will Bernie Sanders will write in with his bird and save the day. Or some other, oh, no. It's not going to be Bernie. It's not going to be capitalism. It's going to be Elon Musk. He's going to build us some rockets. We're going to go to Mars. We'll escape this dying planet. But every one of them, one after the other, fail us.
It's interesting. I was watching, my wife and I were watching an OPB special the other night, and there was a woman on there by the name of Joan Baez. Now,
who remembers Joan Baez?
Okay.
That means you're
old.
old.
That's shocking.
You're old.
North Campus, no one's going to remember
You're
Joan
old.
Baez.
Yeah.
Guarantee it. For you that are under 35 here this morning, Joan Baez was a very well-known folk singer of the 60s and 70s, kind of very much an activist.
Think Bob Dylan, who never sold out.
Contemporary Bob Dylan. And there was a celebration of her 75th birthday, and she was doing a concert, and she had all these just incredible, just iconic people, Paul Simon and others who came up and would play part of the set with her. And right at the end of the set, she was closing, and she said, I want to sing this last song. Anybody see it? It was this unbelievable line. She said, this last song I'm going to play as we descend into the abyss. It's like, whoa, that's an encouraging way to end things. Thanks, Joan. And she was referring, as we descend into the abyss, she was referring to the political state of our culture right now. And I thought to myself, she nailed it. She nailed it, because as you look around at the institutions of our culture, at the banking industry, like Jason mentioned, at the political system, at the even sometimes the mess in the church, as you look around at institutions that we have trusted in, and if you take God out of the equation and we're just material in motion, it's easy to think maybe we are descending into the abyss. Fear is palatable now in our culture. But maybe that fear is a wake-up call for the believer to examine where your security really lies. You understand what I mean? Maybe if I find myself going through the days, looking at those institutions and watching them unravel to some degree, And if my heart is gripped or filled or nagged by fear, perhaps it's a time to examine the inner circle, the inner core of my life to see where does my trust lie. Because as the foundations are being shaken, the prophet would ask, what will the righteous be found doing? I want to tell you that the foundations are being shaken. And the idea of descending into the abyss is pretty much in my opinion, that's kind of a natural reaction. But for the believer, our foundation does not rest upon the institutions of men. It rests in the heart of a powerful, wise, and loving Father. But see, that's a tough thing for me if I've never known a wise and loving Father. In a way, I'm kind of orphaned, right? I'm orphaned. I go through life looking, like he said, for some affirmation, some trust, something that a father provides. And so Jesus would tell this story to a bunch of hard-hearted religious people. That's probably the most iconic story of all of his parables. He used parables was a story to illustrate a greater, deeper truth. And in Luke 15, we find Jesus tells 3 stories about lostness. He talks about just a lost coin. He talks about a lost sheep. And then he talks about 2 lost sons. We like to call it the story of the prodigal son. I don't believe that's true at all. That's a Bible that's a much later writer's way of forming Bible chapters. It's not the story of a prodigal son. It's the story of a searching father. And he has not 1, but 2 sons. And he describes what it meant to be lost. In the context of the story, it starts with this. The tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the institutional people, the Pharisees and teachers of the law, muttered to themselves or each other, this man welcomes sinners and even eats with them. That's a statement of the condition of their hearts. That this man that they'd watched for the last 3 years heal and bind up the wounds and save, they're concerned in the hardness of their hearts that he's hanging out and even eating with these kinds of people.
So Jesus tells the story, and remember the gospel writer here is Luke. Luke, the only Gentile author. So what meaning this would have to him as an outsider when Jesus says...
He's the only writer that records this parable, Luke. Yeah. No, the other 3 Jewish writers don't record this. Mm-hmm.
There was a man who had 2 sons, Jesus says. The young one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Just reminder, the younger asked for the estate. The elder in this culture would have got the lion's share of everything. But the younger is the one saying, I want it all and I want it now. Not long after that, the young son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went, hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death." So there's this moment of revelation, as stomachs have a way of making our minds kick in sometimes. There's a moment of revelation where he goes, wait a minute, I'm a hired servant here. And he treats his hired servants terrible. I have nothing to eat. My father would treat his servant better than this. I said I don't want to be his son anymore, but maybe I could be his servant. So he said to go back into the father and say to him, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." In other words, he's rehearsed in his mind, this is what I'll say to my father when I get there. So he got up and went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to them, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." The father cuts him off halfway through his prepared speech. But the father said to his servant, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead, is alive again. he was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate.
Can you imagine, many of us in this room would remember when you'd done something wrong and the words of your mother that said, we're going to wait until your father gets home. Did that strike feelings of warm, gentle memories in you? Warm but not friendly. Yeah. Wait till your father gets home. Think about this with me. What was the driving emotion of this young man as he headed home to his father after squandering, first of all, shaming his father? To ask for the wealth of your father before he had passed away was the most dishonoring thing you could do as a son, as a Hebrew boy.
I wish you were dead.
I wish you were dead. Just give me the money. I don't care about you. I just want my money. And not only that, he doesn't go off and build an empire. He squanders it on wine and women and song. And now that he squandered it, he's eating the cursed food of the Gentiles, feeding pigs. So you can imagine with me, would you? Please track with me this morning as he heads home. We don't know how far, but it must have been not far enough for him to think about it along the way. He's rehearsing his speech. I'm going to say this. I'm not worthy to be your son. Just make me like a hired hand, and I'm going to hope the hammer doesn't come down. I don't know how this is going to go. I'm not sure, but I'm headed home. I'm headed home. Fear. You know, John would say in his epistle, he would say, perfect love casts out all fear. You know, my observation is that my own father, he was an amazing behavior specialist. And many of yours. He wasn't a believer as he was raising me, so he made sure my behavior was on, right? But there is a vast difference, guys, between being a behavior specialist with your kids and shaping the soul of a son. See, as men, we know how to be behavior specialists. I'm gonna train you so you don't embarrass yourself or me. You're gonna grow up. You're gonna be a man of integrity. You're gonna do this right. But there's not a lot of warmth there, is there? But the shaping of a soul, the shaping of a young man or woman's life in the hand of both a just and merciful Father is something that produces life. And we live in a culture that is full of fear, angry at authority, angry at God, angry at men, angry. And yet all God has tried to do is shape us. This is this story. Watch the reaction of this father. This father isn't about embarrassment or money lost. This father is about, oh, son, welcome home. And he puts a ring on his finger. This symbol of honor. He puts a robe on his back, this symbol of worth and respect. He puts sandals on his feet, this symbol of belonging. Only a beggar would run around barefoot in that culture. Only a beggar, only someone who was homeless or parentless would run around barefoot. No, put the sandals on. That son belongs to me. But this story is about two sons. Because in this first son, you have a picture of, I believe, our liberal culture that says it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter, you can do whatever you want, God's always going to forgive you. And so there's this sloppy living. And that's a ditch. And then in the other side of the road, you have this ditch of this. Meanwhile, the older son is in the field, and he comes near the house, he hears music and dancing and party. He calls one of his servants to ask what's going on. Well, your brother's come home. Your father's killed the fatted calf because he has him back now safe and sound. And the older brother becomes angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. And he answered, look, I've given all these years slaving you and never disobeyed your orders. So here you have this conservative moralist, this legalist that says, I've just done it all right. I've checked every box. Never done anything wrong, never sinned. I've stayed away from all that stuff that my idiot brother got into trouble with. Maybe you had one of those brothers. You never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. You incredible hardness. And this your son of yours, not my brother, it's the son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, and you kill the fatted calf. This is Jesus telling the story. And this father pleads with his son, you're always with me, and have you forgotten? Everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate and be glad. And your brother was dead. He's alive again. He was lost and is found. What's wrong with you?
You know, what's wrong with him was the mirror image, just like Bruce described these two ditches on the side of the road. The mirror image of what was wrong with his younger sibling. Both of them acted like God was dead. Both of them acted like their father was dead, but in different ways. The younger one said, I wish you were dead. Give me what's coming to me so I can go live the way I want. The other one had him right in the house with him. And remember, the two crowds that are standing around Jesus as he tells this story are the sinners and the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are complaining about the sinners, saying, they're no brother of mine. But both of them, they wish one another were dead, but they act as if the father is dead. He's right there in the father's house the whole time and never speaks to him. Instead, uses behavior, uses the law, uses, I'll have these rules, I'll follow these rules, I'm going to do everything right, I'm going to earn. And that's never been the father's will, ever. And he has to go after both of them in different ways. But who's more likely to receive? Because Jesus bumps into this over and over and over again. Not that do we think he loved the Pharisees less than he loved sinners? No, we don't think that. We don't think that. It's that to whom much has been forgiven, there's much love that comes from that. Those who don't think they need much forgiven, they don't have much love for God. I don't even see what you don't have to forgive me of anything. I've done everything right. And you haven't given me squat. Actually, that's not true. You have not done everything right. You think you've done everything right. And that's your problem, self-righteousness. Both of them act like God is dead.
So this origin thing, these two young men had forgotten who they were. And I believe that this call to repentance, this message we have in the public square is this declaration that I've been redeemed. I'm not an orphan anymore. As you go out and you and I go out into this world, we don't wander around like lost souls. We don't wander around fearing what they fear. We don't wander around cursing what they curse, full of bitterness and anger and frustration, judgmental. Isn't it crazy that the young son, the one who squandered all the money, lived in constant fear of who he was because of his failures? The older son lived in constant bitterness and anger, but they both, like you said, were missing God, and they were misrepresentations. And the father in this story is this God who doesn't wink at sin, doesn't excuse sin. No, he forgives it. And he also deals with this and said, I have this, I'll handle this for you. And our message in this public square is this message of security, this message of hope. John Piper tells a story of being a young boy in Southern California on vacation with his parents. Unfamiliar with the Pacific Ocean, he wandered out when he was about 10 years old, just a few yards off the beach into the water, and before he knew it, he was caught in an undertow. And he was being swept out to sea faster than his little legs could swim. And the water pulled him out, and he started to wonder. He couldn't even see the beach. It was happened so fast. And he thought in his little 11-year-old mind his whole life was flashing before his eyes, and he was going to die that day. And in the middle of that moment, all of a sudden he felt this hand on his shoulder, pulling him up. And he realized his father had saw him flailing in the waves and had rushed out to grab him and saved his little life. And he makes this comment. He remembers the security of that moment. He remembers the rush of emotion he felt to feel his father's hand underneath his. And he said, in that spirit of yielded affection, one cannot boast. I got nothing to brag about. It's only my Father's strong hand that is under my arm. I have nothing to boast about. And I worship you. We're going to finish this morning. Worship team could come up. The writer John in the very first chapter says, he came to those who were his own, the sons of Abraham, the sons of Jacob. But his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to once again become the children of God, children born not of natural descent or human decision or husband's will, but he gave us the opportunity to be born of God.
So how does this move into the public square? Because hopefully, as the Word of God sinks into our heart, it has an effect. It should have, as Bruce just described, this kind of calming effect. Oh, there's a God on the throne. Not just an impersonal God on the throne. I recognize that's my Father. All right, I'm going to be okay. So Jesus, in these last opportunities to have conversation with his disciples, as he knows, I'm going away. I'm going to prepare a place for you. He's got to let them go into the public square. He's got to let them walk from the security of having his physical presence around them all the time to something else. And he says this, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. So the attitude in which we leave here and move into an unbelieving culture is an attitude of peace. And listen, that might not sound super powerful right now. Oh, peace? You're gonna arm me with peace? Just take a look around. People are freaking out. People are in panic mode. Just turn on late night TV and you can hear the shrill fear in their voice. It's all coming to an end. They're screaming at one another. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. To just walk into the room, there's something about a calm father walking into a room. Hey, it's gonna be all right. Why do you think that? Why do you believe that? Just first be a peaceful presence in your culture. Don't buy into the fear and the worry and the panic. Believe that he is coming back and he will not leave you as orphans.
I was watching Trish, Jason's wife, the other day. They have 2 foster kids at times, babies that have been taken out by our government from families that couldn't or wouldn't take care of them properly. And I just know a little bit of the backstory of these 2 little babies. It would be enough to ruin anybody. And I was watching Trish the other day with this little baby girl who's been through more in her short year and a half than anybody should go through in a lifetime. And just watching this little baby just secure in this woman's arms that she has no idea who she is. All she knows is she's safe. We're going to take communion here this morning together as we finish. If you're visiting, you're more than welcome to take communion with us. I just wonder if there's people in the room this morning you've never heard the words of a father bless you. You've waited and longed to hear those words of a father over your life. And God wants to bless you. It doesn't matter which son you are. So as we take, we'll just pick up the elements and we'll come back and then we'll take together.